All right, on that note, let's welcome the one, the only, rock journalist extraordinaire, Mr. Mitch LaFon. You're live on the air. What's going on, Mitch?
Not much, boys. Just hanging out and listening to the show. Sounded good, actually.
Oh, thank you. Look at that. I'm excited now.
Yeah, well, I'm excited, too. There's all kinds of good stuff going on. There's good music, great new bands. There's Kiss is on tour in Australia. You know, hey, life is wonderful these days.
I'll tell you what, like, music-wise, like, this year, I felt like started out real slow. Like, every year I do, like, a top 20 countdown of my
Right.
songs of the year. And for, like, the first 6 months, it was, like very slim pickings, and now all of a sudden, since the summer hit, it's like the rock world has exploded, and we're even like having people back on the charts, which is blowing my mind.
Yeah, and today the German sort of RIAA announced that the new Iron Maiden has sold 100,000 copies in Germany and gone gold. So it's nice to see our band going gold and platinum again, but. You know, I'll disagree a little bit on the first 6 months being slow. They were slow, I guess, for the bigger bands that we know, the Kisses and the Van Halens. But I turned my attention to Sweden and Europe, and there was just a bunch of great bands going on over there. The Poodles put out a new album called Devil in the Details, which was great. Who else was out there? Bonfire out of Germany had an album called Glorious. That was great. Ammunition out of Norway had an album called Shanghai. I mean, there was a lot of great rock going on. It just wasn't Canadian and American bands. That's the problem. Right. We just didn't get to hear about them.
That really seems to be like the real true hotbed now of music is Sweden and Germany and places like that over there, Norway. Like anymore, that's where I'm getting requests to do interviews for from bands over there.
Yeah, it really is. Sweden has a total rock revival. I mean, I've been compiling sort of my best of 2015 list. You know, I keep it all year long, and I'll whittle it down by the end. But Backyard Babies is on there. They're Swedish. Mustache is on there. They're from Europe. And the other bands I mentioned, the Clips and the Pooh, it's just a lot of Heat is on there, another Swedish band. There's just a lot of great rock going on in Europe, and you know, hey, great. I mean, the good thing about a lot of these bands is that they're young kids, so they're picking up the torch, they're picking up the mantle, and they're moving it forward, which unfortunately North America is not doing. We're getting a lot of sort of Carrie Underwood and that kind of knockoff, but we're not getting really good rock bands, unfortunately.
Now, why do you think that is? Like, and I always ask a lot of like people that I interview that question is, why do you think over in Europe our music, our genres of music of hard rock and metal are so alive and supported by the fans over there, and then over here in the States it's just not happening?
You know, my perception has always been that fans in Europe are very, very loyal to their band and to their soccer team, to whatever, you know. A Volvo owner is going to be a Volvo owner their entire life. It just seems to be the European way that you stick to what you like, which is great. North America, Canada, and the States, and Mexico if you want, but Canada and the States in particular, we seem to be more, hey, show me what you got. What's new? You know, let's move on to the next new thing. Hey, we tried Red Bull for a while. Let's go to Monster. We tried Kiss for a while. Let's go to the, Culture Club. We tried Culture Club for a while. We just seem to always want something new. I don't know. Maybe we're just not, if you look at attention deficit disorder, it exists in North America, and European countries don't recognize it, so who knows?
Right.
One of those things. One of those weird things.
So, all right,
I'm glad
I really got a ton of questions for you, though, about you.
Right,
because when you answered me, when I was looking for suggestions of guests, and you answered me, first I was shocked. And I was just like, oh, this is going to be awesome. Because you're somebody I've always looked up to. And
thank you.
I just want, how does a person, well, first off, too, Do you know how hard it is to try to find information about you?
Yeah, it doesn't exist because I control it. I mean, I don't. I mean, that sounds like some kind of conspiracy plot, but I've always been very aware that whatever you put on the internet is very searchable. So I try to avoid putting birthdays and where I live, and I just try to avoid that stuff because you never know how somebody's going to use it. So, So yeah, I guess when you search engine stuff, you'll find a lot of Mitch LaFon interviewed Journey, and Mitch LaFon interviewed Whitesnake, and Mitch LaFon interviewed Scorpions. And plus, my Facebook has become such a rock news sourcing area that if I started putting, here's Mitch at the park with his daughter, people would write in and go, what the hell was that? Like, tell me about the new Scorpions album. I don't care that you were at the park. So, but I'm perfectly fine with that. That is fine with me. I actually like the fact that my Facebook is some kind of clearing out area for rock news because people want to read it and they want to come, they want to come see it and they like the stories that I post. So it's a very nice relationship that people, I'm good with that. But yeah, go ahead. Ask any question you want. I'll avoid answering the ones I don't. No, go ahead.
One of the only things I was truly able to find was that you went to college for psychology.
Yeah, Master's in Childhood Psychology at McGill University.
So how do you end up going to school for that and becoming a rock journalist?
I've always had an interest in psychology. The system that we're in Canada, where we do high school and then we do sort of in the States you do middle school, but we do sort of a middle college up here, which is right after high school but before university. And a lot of the courses they offered was Psych 101 and Parapsych, and so I got into all of that, and I just found it as a hoot. And it actually is very, very useful in the rock reporting thing because you need to understand the person you're talking to. And if you listen to some of the questions I ask and some of the way I sometimes direct an interview, it almost becomes like a guy on the couch kind of session. And so I think it actually helps quite a bit in doing what I do. And it helped quite a bit at the time when you're 17, 18, 24 to understand who the hell you are. I don't know if I can say that word, but it helps you understand who the heck you are. So, it was very useful, and I had grand aspirations of, maybe opening my own private clinic, or maybe working in the school district, and it just turned out that the rock stuff is just a lot more fun. But I'm glad I have the training. I mean, I'm glad I have two kids now that are 9 and 12. See, there's more facts for you, and they come back from school or the teacher says something, and I can sort of say, all right, it's not that big a deal. We'll have a chat. Like it's useful in life. It's certainly not a wasted skill. Right.
Do you think that helps you in the choices as being a parent?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The great debate that we've had in our household that I think a lot of people have had in their household is should the kids play violent video games and this and all that? And the one thing we learned in the whole psych thing was there's a difference between fantasy and reality. You can have a fantasy world and live in that world and not be a crazy person or have. And so the point I'm saying is when you got to this debate about parenting and video games, how can I put it? In high school in the States or in Canada, they will make you read Shakespeare, which is made-up characters killing each other, and they'll make it required. But you take a video game, and it's mythical characters killing each other, and it's bad. But if you look at it, it's like the same bloody thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't freak out with my son when he wants to play a ball. I just go, you know what? The day he's sleeping with a gun under his pillow, maybe I'll have a talk with him and say, okay, now we're getting into stuff like real world stuff, this is not the same. But otherwise, and so that has helped me sort of stay calm, stay focused, and not freak out that he wants to play Grand Theft Auto or whatever.
Right.
You know, that's just one example. But there are other parenting choices where you look at it and you go, yeah, but okay, my kid's just looking for attention. Oh my, and so yeah, it helps. Certainly
That's
does
cool.
help. Yeah.
So, did you have any background in journalism, or like how did you like make that jump?
No, I had none at all. I've always been a good talker. I've always been a good speaker, and you know, I was able to get in front of classes. I was able to, you know, at university, I was a teacher's assistant for a while. I worked at a library when I was younger, so you know, talking to people I've always been good at. And you know, I just lost my train of thought. So yeah, no, I don't have any journalism training, but I do have an innate ability, and I think if you look at a lot of people that are good in their domain, they don't have all this training. You know, and I'm not going to compare myself to Bill Gates in terms of success, but in terms of the story, right. Bill Gates didn't go to any kind of university of computing. He just was innately good at it. And,
right.
And you know, I think I'm good at what I do. At least I like to think that I'm good at what I do. I hope others are good, but, you know. So no formal training. You know, I think sometimes you just know what the right question is to ask. You know, whether you're talking to a girlfriend or your son or your mom, sometimes you just know what the right question is, and nobody teaches
right.
you that. And that's sort of the same thing with the whole rock star stuff. You know, when a band has a band member that has just passed away or something, it's not appropriate to get all sort of TMZ on them and say, hey, so Joe just died. Ha-ha, let's talk. Like, you have to have some kind of rapport and respect, and you just need to know what to ask under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Even like I'm a huge a Randy Rhoads nut, and I've interviewed Randy's brother, you know, Rudy Sarzo, a lot of people in the whole Randy Rhoads community, and
right.
Even though it's 30-something years later, I still cringe when I ask the questions about him.
Yeah, and sometimes you know, I have an interview with Frankie Bonelli coming up next week, and you know, it's about the documentary and the Quiet Riot movie, and of course Kevin DuBrow and even Randy Rhoads are part of the Quiet Riot story, and so right. I'm thinking, I'm really thinking very seriously now, how do I approach those topics? Because to ignore them completely doesn't make sense in the context of a documentary that mentions them wholeheartedly.
Sure.
But how do you remain respectful, tasteful, tactful? Mm-hmm. You know, you don't go, so hey, you know. So I can understand your trepidation with Randy Rhoads and stuff, because at some point it just becomes gawking. And yeah. I don't think the role of a reporter is to gawk. It's to tell a story. And those are two separate things.
Yeah, I interviewed Bernie Torme last week, and I mean the big thing with Bernie Torme was the whole thing with him coming in after Randy died, and I was kind of scared to bring it up, but I finally did towards the end, and he ended up talking in depth about it. And I only had one small question about it, and he talked 15-20 minutes about it. I was kind of shocked and surprised.
Well, I can imagine he's used to the question, so he has a bit of a spiel to go over, but. You know, at the same time, if the question is posed correctly, they'll answer, and they'll give you really great, lucid answers, and that's a good thing, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, were you a musician at all? Did you play any instruments, or just a fan?
You know, I'm a failed musician. And I know, so speaking of Frankie Bonelli, when Lick It Up and Metal Health came out, I had the drum set in the kitchen, and I had the vinyl the record player set up in the kitchen, and when nobody was in the kitchen, I would crank it and play along to it. And I use the word play along very loosely. And it just seemed to me that it would require a lot more commitment and hard work to become a good drummer than I could have ever anticipated. And I also got frustrated in the fact that I didn't sound like them after half an hour. And I'm used to getting stuff. I'm sort of that fish or cut bait kind of school of thought. And so when I do something, I fish, and if it ain't working, I just go, well, it ain't working, I cut bait. It's not that I'm a quitter. It's just that I know my limitations, and I know where I'm going to succeed and where I'm not. So I had this ability to talk, and I said, okay, this whole drumming thing is not going to work. And I was also, in those years, in my teen years, exceptionally shy, doing an oral in front of English class or standing in front of any crowd. I couldn't do it, and so I couldn't see myself getting on a stage and having people judge me by clapping or not clapping. Or, speaking of psychology, right, here we go. And I knew that I could talk to people, and being behind the scenes is fine, and especially back in those days, I had interviewed Gene Simmons when I was 11, but after that, when I started doing stuff for Brave Words, it was Mitch interviewed so-and-so is on the phone, doesn't see Mitch types it up and sends it in. It was very impersonal, and so I could flourish in that. And it was very easy for me to flourish in that. And of course, that's all dissipated and gone by now. I'm not that geek anymore. But it was my way to get into the music biz without getting into the music biz, right? I was more. I could see myself more of a behind-the-scenes guy, and it seems to have worked out quite well.
Yeah, I think so. I think absolutely it has. And
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I kind of did like the same thing. Like I played guitar on and off for 30 plus years now, and I suck, and I admit I suck, and I wanted to be like a way to be part of the scene that I was supporting. So about 13 years ago, I started, as I was at these shows, I started writing reviews of the shows. And then I was like, I would send them out to, local magazines or just sending them out online to sites. And next thing I know, got picked up. And I was like, wow. And then the bands were really receptive to this. So I kept doing it more and more and more. And I kind of felt that kind of same way. It was kind of like my contribution to the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels good because what we've done, even though in many cases it's a footnote to rock history, it is nice. I mean, it is nice to go to Wikipedia, for example, and look up a band and you see, as told to Mitch LaFon, you go, all right, that's kind of cool. I sort of affected the history of that band in a slight way, which is kind of cool. And so it is it is an artistic contribution. I mean, there is an art to what we do. You can listen to other interviewers that are absolutely better than me, but there are others that are not as good, and they just don't have that art. They have their 10 questions written down, and regardless of what the answer is, they just want to get on to question 2 and then on to question 3. And sometimes you got to just throw the question out. And when a guy says something interesting, you just got to pick up on it and run with it, and you got to have that flexibility. And not everybody can do that. But it's nice to know that, here's a moment that I had this year. I was at Heavy Montreal, and the band Arch Enemy was scheduled to talk to me. And, I had to research the band because I know about the band. I've seen the band, but I'm not a diehard fan where I know every crazy detail. Right. And I sat down with the guitarist, and he looked at me and he goes, oh, my God, you're Mitch LaFon. And I went, yeah. Because this is so cool being interviewed by you. You're more of the melodic rock guy, but this will be fun. And I was like, okay, that's kind of strange. But it's nice to know that you've been read and that people know your name, and you know, it's a kick. Listen, none of us are David Lee Roth or Paul Stanley or any of that, but we have our little tiny, you know, we have a room in the basement, let's say, and that's nice.
Absolutely. Now, how about that? Like, how is that for you? Like, you brought the arch enemy moment. Like, do you get that a lot, especially now with more? I mean, let's face it, there's so many bands coming out now, and so many more heavier bands are breaking through. So when you have those moments, is it kind of difficult for you, or you have learned to adapt to it over the years?
In what sense? Where I have to have different the different genres of bands?
Well,
like,
a band that you really don't know much about.
Aren't in my wheelhouse?
Yeah.
No, you know, I pride myself on the research I do. Whenever I have an interview, I put in hours of research, whether it's books or autobiographies or Google or Wikipedia or whatever, or going to my Facebook and saying, hey, I'm interviewing so-and-so. What question should I ask? You know, I do the research so that I'm quite comfortable talking to anybody, whether it's death metal, grindcore, pop, jazz. I mean, you give me a name, tell me what they're plugging, and I'll dig up the history and I'll run with it. But again, it goes back to the fact that, especially with bands that you're not super familiar with, you gotta listen. And when they're talking, you gotta go, he just mentioned that. I need to pick up on that. And sometimes you can't pick up, you can't interrupt and say, oh, you just said this, by the way. Sometimes you got to sort of keep it running in the back of your head for the next 10 minutes until you get a spot to sort of slide it in. But, yeah, you know, I'm very comfortable with anybody. Listen, recently I've done a death metal band. I've done a grindcore band. I've done my classic rock bands, you know, my Scorpions and my Queensryche.
Mm-hmm.
How do you say that with a possessor? That's kind of tough. But I also did a guy named Kevin Moyer, who's a film producer who made a documentary on an artist called Elliott Smith, who passed away years ago. And this might sound bad to say, but I didn't know anything about Elliott Smith or about Kevin Moore. But I can guarantee you, but by the time I got that call, I knew everything that needed to be known to have a very smart interview. And that's what you got to do.
Now, how about when you're approached with a situation where you're asked to interview somebody and you're just not a fan at all? You know their work very well, but you're just not a fan, or there's something about them you just don't like. Like, you just can't stand them for some reason.
That happens all the time. All the time. A lot of the bands that I've interviewed, I personally don't, and I don't want to make this sound bad for the band, but there are some bands I just don't like. I don't own their album. I would not own their album if it was the last album I could buy. And the rule for that is you never let them know. Don't get on there with an attitude or be aggressive. Treat everybody as when I'm speaking to them, they are the most important number one band, artist, person that has existed in the history of rock and roll, period. And that's a respectful thing. I mean, you know, there's no point in saying, you know, Joe Band, I hate you, and you thought your last album sucked. I mean, because at the end of the day, a publicist, a record company, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, you know what, don't talk to Mitch, he's an ass. And you can't do that. And so you have to be respectful. I've done a couple of bands recently that I truly don't care for their music. No offense to anybody, but you'll never know it. You'll listen to the interview and you'll say, wow, those guys sounded like they were friends for the last 15 years. And it's, you know, sort of what you got to do, right? I mean, fans don't tune in to listen to me. They tune in to listen to the artist. So it can never be about me. That is certainly rule number one. And that should be any interviewer. Any interviewer should always remember that they don't tune in to listen to you. They tune in to listen to that artist. And that's why there's spikes sometimes. You know, an artist with a huge fan base will draw in a much larger listenership because those 10,000 people want to hear you. Well, they don't want to hear you. They want to hear Metallica talking to, they're not listening to Mitch talking to Metallica. They're listening to Metallica talking to Mitch, kind of thing.
Right. Gotcha.
And that's fine. That's fine. We're just conduits. We're not the stars. Even though I'd like to think so sometimes, but my wife makes sure that I know I'm not.
Now, did you start off the bat doing interviews, or did you do reviews or articles, or?
I did the whole thing. Years and years ago, back in 96, 97, as the Kiss reunion tour was ramping up, the online community, one of the guys said, let's do an Ace Frehley tribute album. And I started contacting different artists through different means. I've always been very good at tracking stuff down. And that got me started. So I sort of did a tribute album first. And then from that, with the artists that I had met on the Return of the Comet CD, I kept in contact with some of them. And then, like LA Guns, for example, news would come up that I would be told of, and then I would mention it to Brave Words, and Brave Words finally said to me, they said, every time you send us news as a rumor, it turns out to be 100% true. You're just never wrong. And I go, well, yeah, because the artists are actually telling me, by the way, I was telling the stuff with permission. None of this stuff was off the record. All the off the record stuff has and always will be off the record. But they always said, hey, could you leak this, or could you mention that, or could you get us this printed? And I did that, and so eventually Brave Words said, hey, could you start? And then there was, can you write an album review? Could you write a review of the show? Could you? And I did those, but I've always disliked doing that. And the reason I disliked it is growing up as a Kiss fan and a Cheap Trick fan and an Aerosmith fan, but mostly as a Kiss fan, reviews in magazines, whether it was Rolling Stone or whatever it was, always was, the new album by Kiss sucks, and you should all hate yourselves if you like it. And I went, yeah, I don't. So why do I care what you're telling me? And so when I started writing reviews, I was like, you know what? It shouldn't matter what I think. If you happen to like the new, Bjork album, well, good for you. I'll never like it, and it shouldn't matter. And so I just never got into the whole writing reviews. I just couldn't put my heart and soul into something that I couldn't believe in. It didn't make sense. I don't care if Rolling Stones doesn't like Sonic Boom. I don't. What do I care if you don't like the new Black Star Rider? I like it. Poison. Poison albums in the '80s always panned. Oh, they're horrible. They can't play their instruments. You know what? I don't care. It makes me feel good, and I sort of wanted to convey that to readers. I would always think to myself, don't read this review. I don't care if you don't like it. If you enjoy it, that's all that matters. And there were some albums, I remember one in particular, Samantha 7, which was the C.C. DeVille thing.
Loved it.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was this fun, poppy, punky record. Was it the next Mona Lisa? No, but I loved it, and I gave it an 8 on 10 review. And the letters that we got of, Mitch doesn't know anything, it's a piece of crap, he's an idiot, how can he think that this guy who can't play guitar? And I'm like, but I'm just telling you what I like, and I enjoyed putting it in the car driving around. And that was sort of that turning point moment where I just went, you know what, I don't really care if you don't like what I think of the album, and you shouldn't care what I think of the album either, if it makes you feel good. So I did the review stuff, but I pulled away from that. I'm really more comfortable doing the interviews. That's where I think I shine.
Now, when you're doing interviews, do you prefer to do phone interviews or actually be one-on-one, your quote-unquote one-on-one with that person in person?
I've changed. 5-10 years ago, I loved the one-on-one, in the building kind of thing. There was always an excitement of going to a venue and getting the access and being walked to the room and then talking with them, and I found that very appealing and entertaining, and there was a whole vibe to it. But now I quite prefer the phoner. I have my cup of coffee sitting next to me. I have my windows with all the research that I pulled out that interesting points that I think that and the research is for two reasons. A, to lead the interview down a path, and sometimes you get an interview subject that just goes yes, no, and so you got to have all these backup windows with, all right, well, let's go to question 10, 12, 14, let's keep it moving. And that doesn't happen in the in-person. And the other thing is that it's a lot more convenient this way. When they say, we're going to phone at 5 o'clock and you got 20 minutes, they phone at 5 o'clock and you got 20 minutes. At the venue, it's like, yeah, but they just put out the catering and the band's hungry and we got to do sound check, but the sound check's not working well. And can you just wait here a minute? And yeah, I know the opening band that you wanted to see just went on, but they really can only talk to you at that time, and it's just like,
right.
It's too much hassle. That's not to say that I don't want to do them. At Heavy Montreal, which is that festival that takes place in Montreal in August, that's the gig. You're in the media tent, and they play the show, and they filter back to you, and that's the gig. And that's perfectly fine, and I'm comfortable with it. But, if you had said to me, hey, Mitch, drive to wherever tonight, and we'll meet at this place, and we'll do this interview, I would have been like, it's cold outside. I don't want to go anywhere. I'm kind of comfortable here, right? So no, I like the phoners. I really like the phoners now.
I do too.
And I've also, and I don't want to sound pompous when I say this, but I've gotten to that point where when I go to a show, a lot of times I'm invited, and it's nice to go unencumbered. You just go to the show, You hang out, you say hi to the guys, then you go to the front, you watch the show, and then you go home. It's a lot more enjoyable than, I got to go to the venue, go to work, then I got to watch the show, if I get to watch the show, because what if the interview is during the... And I've had that before, where... I'm trying to think what band it was. Well, it's happened a ton of times, but anyway, let's just say Queensryche Scorpions. I'm just using that as an example because they're on tour right now. Even though they didn't have, it would be like, hey, if you want to interview the Scorpions, they're going to be talking at 8:30. But Queensryche started at 8:15. It's like, well, that's the gig. You want to interview Rudolph? Well, you got to come back at 8:30. And it's like, yeah, but I just missed half the show that I wanted to see, and so. It's better this way. The phone is better, a lot better.
I agree. And like when you started doing the reviews at shows and all, it kind of got to be like, wow, like this is like work to where I'm not enjoying the show now. Like because I have to pay attention so much, I can't even enjoy the show, the music, or nothing. And I just got away from that myself because of that reason.
Yeah, and there was one time where I wrote an incredibly nice review of Don Dawkin and a Dawkins show. This was in 2003, and I sent it off to Classic Rock magazine, and whoever was the editor over there who edited that piece, and I have no idea who the name is, because it sort of goes into a pool, I guess, and they bounce it around until somebody edits it. They wrote some really unkind things about Don having a wig and blah, 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 and I was like, I didn't write that. And I'm friends with Don, and he got me on the phone and said, dude, what is that? And I was like, I swear to you, I did not write that. And then I had to cut and paste and send my original review, and he goes, well, why would they do that if it wasn't? And I just said, you know what, I ain't doing that no more. I'm done. With an interview,
wow.
And especially with one-on-one in the podcast. By the way, and that also happened with a review. I wrote a review of the Bon Jovi Crush album, and the editor, and that person, I do know his name, but I won't say it, changed it to the point where they gave the album a 4 on 10 and said some really nasty stuff, and they kept some of my stuff, but that one really annoyed me because, they said something like Living on a Prayer was off the New Jersey album or something like really stupid. And I went, are you stupid? That makes me look like a complete idiot because everybody knows it's on Slippery When Wet. So it made me look like an idiot. It made me look nasty. Now, I don't know anybody in the Bon Jovi camp, so nobody calls me on it. But anybody who read it and goes, dude, Mitch doesn't know that living on a prayer is on slippery. What an idiot this guy is. And it was out of my control. It's in print. I couldn't change it. It's not like now where, something happened the other day where a story went out on one of the websites and they had misrepresented what had been said. So I just got them on the line and I said, that's not right. Can you correct it? And they said, sure, no problem. No harm done. It wasn't intentional. And of course it wasn't. I mean, there was no conspiracy there. But at least my name is saved. I can go back and say, no. Yes, there was an error. I know your fans saw it and told you about it, but it's since been corrected. It doesn't live forever and always. Anyway, just getting back to one-on-one, that's what I like because I don't edit the interviews. I put them out there as is. To me, that's the concept of the show. You're getting an unfiltered interview. And so you can't say, Mitch didn't quote me right, Mitch did this. It's like, no, this is what was said. This is what is out there. And I think the fans get a kick out of that because they hear the actual interview. They don't have to rely on a headline or a pull quote. I'm more comfortable with that because I know if there's any controversy, here's the tape. I mean,
right.
Don't look at me. You said it. Yeah, well, I wasn't feeling well. I was tired. Okay, but here's the tape. So I like it this way now. It's a more comfortable situation. There's less of these mix-ups and embarrassing moments. And hey, one-on-one with Mitch LaFon, I'm all good with it as it is.
Have you had situations like that where you've interviewed somebody and then they'll get back to you and say, you got to edit that or you got to take that out? Or
yeah, all the time. It's part of the business. But I don't. And with the podcast, you know what? With the podcast, that has diminished greatly. And I've taken it as a practice before an interview starts to remind them. I say, this is being put to audio. We're using the audio. If there's anything that's off the record, then don't say it because I like to go live to tape. I don't want to have to go back and start taking stuff out. And so the artists have an understanding of this is what it is. I got to be careful with what I say. And you know what? If you listen to a lot of the interviews, there's a lot of candor. There's not a lot of smoke and mirrors going on where an artist is not being honest or is trying to hide something. And in fact, if you look at the websites that report on the interviews I do, it's those nuggets that they're reporting on. A lot of it, which sometimes is a problem because, we talk about the new album. I've had this last year. I did an interview with, you know what? I don't want to say the name. I did an interview with one of the great. I did an interview with one of the great bands from the 70s, and we talked about the vocalist and the voice and the this and that, and it wasn't Paul Stanley, so it's not a Kiss thing. And they had a new album at the time, and all the press, classic rock, brave words, blabbermouth, melodic rock, they all went, so-and-so said blah, 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 blah about his voice. And the record company, which is one of the big three, Sony, Warner, Universal, phoned me and said, that's great that you're in all the press, but the one thing that we care about is the album getting mentioned. It's nowhere. And I go, yeah, but there's 15 interviews in all these different... They go, right, but none of them talk about the... I go, yeah, but if they click on to the actual interview, I go, yeah, but most people are just reading the headline. I go, no, okay, it's not my fault. I did my part. It's not my fault that XYZ website chose to focus on one quote and make the pull quote the entire story. But, you got to be careful with that. And which is why I started doing write-ups and pulling out quotes from interviews so that if you go to Spreaker or iHeartRadio and you see what I've put up and I've written, you can at least see that it says, Joe Smith talked about the new Joe Smith album. And you go, okay, well, at least he's done his part. And if XYZ website takes his material and have gone with something else, that's really out of Mitch's control. And I go, well, yeah, it really is. So sorry about that. But but it's interesting. It really is. You look at you look at a lot of the websites, Melodic Rock, Blabbermouth, Brave Words, and I'm on there 2, 3, 4 times a week. So that to me is a good mark of success and doing a good job with the interviews.
Absolutely. Now, who was your very first interview?
Gene Simmons, when I was 11 years old.
How the hell did you pull that off?
Well, I've always been very industrious. I sat down with the Dynasty album back in late 79, early 80. And, Peter Criss had left and all that. And I had noticed, and I know this sounds remarkable, but I had noticed at a young age that Kiss wasn't in the press all the time. When I was 7, 8, 9, 10, there was a Kiss story all the time going on somewhere, and I noticed after Dynasty that they weren't in like Tiger Beat and 16 magazine, all these magazines that had all these Kiss, they sort of had to vanish. So I said to myself, hey, you know what? We could probably use some press. Hello? And I looked in the back, and my mom had been doing work for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and at 11 I sounded somewhat like a girl. And I looked in the back, and I saw Old Coin Management and all this, and I phoned, back in the old days, you would phone up an area code and add 555-1212, and you'd get an operator. And I said, hey, I'm looking for Old Coin Management in Manhattan or whatever it was. And the operator gave me the phone number, and I phoned the phone number, and I said, hi, I'm Mitch LaFon. I'd like to do an interview with Kiss about their new album. And they went, okay. And I went, what? They went, yeah, sure, no problem. Like, there really was a desperation to talk to anybody. I sensed that. And so they said, we'll have Paul Stanley, blah, 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 come down to Old Coin Management. And I was like, all right. So I told my mom, and she said, all right, I'll drive you. Now, it's an 8-hour drive from here. So I think she sort of said, listen, if my son is smart enough to pull it off, I got to be cool enough to bring him. You can't say no to this. And then I got a call back, and they said, oh, hi, it's so-and-so from management, and Paul Stanley won't be able to do the interview after all. And I was like, oh, crap. And they said, but if you don't mind, we can get you Gene Simmons. And I was like, don't mind? No, that's fine. Good. No, don't worry. I'll be there. And we went down on June 9th, 1980 to Old Coin Management, sat there, and did an interview with Gene. And it's on YouTube. I mean, if you look up Gene Simmons, Mitch LaFon, 1980, you can hear the whole thing.
Really?
And, yeah, you can. The whole thing is there, unedited. And what I did, because I think they were really expecting my mom to show up, she showed up with the professional equipment from CBC and all that. I wrote all of the questions for her, and she went in and did the first 15 minutes, and then she says, hey, by the way, would you mind if my son asked you a few questions? And Gene gave me 10 minutes, and I asked him questions. And you can go to YouTube. I put it up there. Gene Simmons, Mitch LaFon, 1980, and you can listen to it, and you can hear my little tiny voice, and I did that interview. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, plus, it was June 9th, and I don't know about where you are, but in where I am, school ends usually around June 25th for the summer break. So my mom took me away from school for a few days and drove me to New York, and we did the whole thing. It was a moment in time. It certainly was one of those where you just go, everything aligned. And that interview actually has paved the way for a lot of what I do, because I remember when I was in the studio on this Return of the Comet tribute album with the guys from LA Guns, Tracy Gunn goes, aren't you the kid who interviewed Gene Simmons? And I had no idea how he heard the story, and I was like, yeah, that's me. So I think that sort of gave me a little kind of, hey, you ain't so bad, kid. Come over here. I'll talk to you too. I really think that was part of the genesis of the whole thing.
Now, has Gene remembered that over the years?
Gene has. In 1985 at the Kiss Convention Tour in Montreal, I brought him a cassette of it, and he kept it. after that interview in 1980, and I've told the story many times, he made me a member of the KISS Army and sent me some KISS Christmas cards, through 1980, 1981 kind of stuff. He had sent me the infamous letter that says, if you're ever if you're ever in town, drop by and say hi at one of our shows, which I did use, and I did get myself backstage at a couple of shows. He stayed true to his word. I have to give him that.
Wow.
On the Hot in the Shade tour, they came to Montreal, and I brought the letter and I gave it to a roadie, and they brought me to the meet and greet, and I got to meet Gene and Eric Carr and Bruce Kulick, and Paul Stanley did not meet with me at the time because he had just broken his ribs, like in Pittsburgh or something, and so he wasn't doing the meet and greet. But, and then at the KISS reunion tour in Montreal, they came to me and they said, well, listen, Gene and stuff can't meet you, but instead here we're giving you a ticket, and they gave me third row center. Hello. I had bought a ticket, and I was up in the rafters somewhere, and suddenly I had been upgraded to third row center because of this letter. So, he's aware, and like I said, in '95 at the convention tour, I gave him a cassette, and I'm pretty sure that after I put it on YouTube, it has been brought to his attention. I can't 100% say for sure that it has, but I have a feeling, just based on conversations I've had, that it had been brought to his attention. Plus the fact that I tweeted it to him about 100 times.
Who's been your most difficult interview?
Wow. Well, first of all, any interview where they just give you yes/no answers, and that is a lot of the rookie band. I have to say that there really is. There's an art to interviewing, but there is an art to being interviewed. You listen to a David Coverdale, a Paul Stanley, a Bret Michaels, Rob Halford, Alice Cooper. You don't even have to do the work. You just turn on the mic, and they will give you an interview. They just know. They know what to say, how to say. They know what points they need to hit. The talking points that they need to hit. They've got it all, and you can just sort of sit back and go, hey, listen, just tap me on the shoulder when we hit 20 minutes, right? And then you get the rookie bands that just had their first album. You go, so tell me about the new album. And they go, oh man, it's our first album. You go, tell me about how you wrote it. Oh, it was late one night on the bus. You go, okay, listen, work with me here. Like, this is not helping. You got to tell us your story, and particularly because we don't know you got to tell us your story. Like, Paul Stanley could give me yes/no answers, and KISS fans know the story, so it's not a big deal. And then there's been a couple others down the road that have been difficult. If I can, Blackie Lawless was difficult the couple of times I've interviewed him. That said, I believe I've become a much better interviewer, and I would like another shot at him, and I'm sure it would be great, and I'm sure he would be great. Who else has been difficult? The guys in Anthrax are they're not that they're difficult in terms of personalities, but they don't expand on answers. They're sort of in between Paul Stanley and the rookie band. They'll give you a decent answer that'll make like a good headline, but they won't go into details on it. So you've always got to have like 85 questions ready to go when you're talking to them. And that is by no means disrespectful or I hate them. It's just that you really got to work. You got to earn it when you're talking to Anthrax,
Right. Now, how about who's been your funnest?
Oh, easily some of the bands I just mentioned. David Coverdale, always a hoot. I mean, you just say, hey, Dave, and half an hour later he's still talking and he's telling you jokes, and he's, Alice Cooper. His thing with Alice has always been, you've got 15 minutes, and it doesn't matter if he's in the middle of a great dissertation by minute 14:59. At 15, it ends, and so it's sort of this game of, you got to let him answer, but you got to cut him off, and he doesn't want to get cut off, and then you got to fit it all in. You got to get the album question in, the tour question in, and then the history question of, like, it's almost like a game with Alex, and that's just fun. That's just fun. You start to say, okay, I got to ask a question that I'm going to get a long answer on, but I got to make sure I don't ask him a question that he's going to give me such a long answer that I'm not going to get a second question. So it's almost like putting together a puzzle. So Alice is a hoot. Rob Halford, Judas Priest, is an absolute fantastic interview. I mean, first of all, he's just one of the nicest people to talk to. I mean, I don't know about personal life or whatever, but I'm assuming that he's just nice all the time. Because when you talk to him, it's like it's just very nice. It's just nice. It's just very pleasant. It's like talking to your Uncle Bud on the porch. It's just nice. It's a fun moment. Rudolf Schenker, which I've interviewed twice this year, is funny. He's got the accent, and he's got his point of view, and he's got a story, and it doesn't matter what the question is. You'll say, so tell me about what you did last night, and he'll say, yes, the new album. And you go, wait, what? That's not what I asked you. and that's just fun. Rudolph is great. He's fantastic, and just a nice person also to meet. Boy, there's a lot. There's just a lot like that. But those guys in particular, Ronnie James Dio, when I interviewed him years ago, was another one. He had a charity back in the day called Children of the Night, which was about getting young girls off the streets. They had been prostitutes or whatever, and getting them off the streets and into this home or foundation or whatever. And they set up an interview, and they said, listen, Ronnie really wants to promote this Children of the Night thing. He doesn't want to talk about Dio, and would you mind? And of course, a lot of the interviews before me were like, tell me about Children of the Night. Yeah, great. So when you were in Sabbath, and right. I guess that must have been not pleasant. And of course, I can't put words in the mouth of anybody, but when it was my interview time, I said, okay, if that's the rules of the game, I'll stick to it. What do I care? And I asked him a whole interview about just that, and what appeared in Braveworth was a full page on just that. And I got a call back from, I'm trying to think who it was, management or the record company or whatever it was. And they said, hey, Ronnie really appreciated the interview. You really put out there what he wanted, got his message out there as he wanted it put out. And, if you ever had a show or anything, just let us know, and blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that when I got the call, I was actually on my way, the next day or in a couple of days to San Diego, California, and he was playing there at a bar with Armored Saint opening up. And I said, well, I'm going to San Diego, and he's playing there. And I didn't have tickets. I mean, back in those days, there wasn't really much of a Ticketmaster internet selling thing. Right. And they said, yeah, no problem. We'll take care of that. And I was like, oh, all right. And so I got there, and I had a ticket to the show. And then I had an after show meet and greet, and I met him, and I brought the article to give him an actual copy, and he looked it over, and he signed it and sent me home with it, and just said thank you. And it was very peculiar, because here's this guy that's in Sabbath who's Ronnie James Dio, and for that moment he made me sort of feel that I was the rock star, that I had done something, that it was a pleasure for him to meet me and not the other way around. And that was just one of those moments, and that was, and you know what, Rob Halford also sort of makes you feel like that it's not a privilege for me to be interviewing him, that it's a privilege for him to be, that anybody would want to listen to him kind of thing. He gives you that feeling of, no, thank you, not the other way around. And that's rare, but the Ronnie James one was particularly rare, and I have that, of course, laminated on my wall. The article with Ronnie's signature, and and if you scroll around my Facebook, you'll find a picture of me and Ronnie, and I'm wearing a Black Label Society shirt, and I have the little sticky path on my lapel or whatever you want to call it, and that was just one of those. You can't forget that one. You can't undo that one. That was just one of those, and those are the special moments of doing this. I had one at Heavy Montreal that this summer that was in that sort of life moment that you'll never forget.
Right.
I had access where I could sort of go anywhere, and I was up on the stage while Iggy Pop was playing.
Oh, nice.
And which is kind of nice. And of course, the Montreal venue looks out onto the lake and the bridge, and there's a sort of an architectural structure that's quite famously known. And so you see this in the background. The sun is sort of setting, so the sky was a little bit orange. And standing to my right, all of a sudden, was Marky Ramone of the Ramones.
Wow.
And to my left was Alex Skolnick of Testament. And it's like, I'm on a stage watching Iggy Pop with a Ramone. I mean, literally on my right. I mean, our shoulders were bumping. It was literally not like on my right down 5 rows. No, like standing literally shoulder to shoulder. And I'm like, got Marky Ramone's shoulders. I go, wow. Like, not only is it cool in 2015, but if this was like 1977, this would be like uber cool. Like,
yeah, right.
So that's like one of those moments, and those are the fun things about the whole gig.
Now, has there been like an interview that you've done and you get off the phone or you walk away from that person and you just say to yourself, that was it. Like, I can't do a better interview. Like, it just hits you like it's just such a proud moment for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I get those, and I don't want to say I get those a lot, but there are a few where I go, yeah, that's gonna hit. Like I just did one with Todd from Todd Latore from Queensryche, and he started talking about their new album is called Condition Human, and so I turned on that and I said, well, talk to me about the human condition of when you came into the band and how people must have been feeling going on with the lawsuit and stuff. And I know in other interviews when the lawsuit question comes up, they sort of go, it's old hat. And he started talking about it and gave me an answer that I thought was like, yeah, that people are gonna pick up on that, and that's good. And who else did I do this year? There was another one this year that I just went, dude, that was awesome. That's like like David Coverdale in April. I did like a 45 minutes with him, and I thought, I just hit that. I mean, I just nailed that one. That was great, and people in the band said, you know what, that was a really good interview. Here, speaking of bands that I'm not very familiar with, there was an interview with one of the members of a band called Status Quo. Now, Status Quo has been around like 45, 50 years.
Right.
But they're most one of those European bands. North Americans don't really know about Status Quo. And I'm one of those. I know of them. I saw them at Live Aid back in '85, and I, the hit singles sort of filtered, but I don't know the band, right? I'm not a diehard. And I did this interview. I was given like 15 minutes, and it ended up going for almost an hour.
Wow.
And the guy is supposedly notorious for just not liking interviews and not answering. And he gave me all this extra time, and I kept saying, well, I know that our time is up. And he was like, no, keep going. And, it might sound silly, but I have a Google alert for my name because I want to see who's taking what kind of thing, to keep track of where my stuff ends up.
Right.
And I kept getting Google alerts from the Status Quo news groups and Status Quo websites and stuff. And people kept saying, that's the best interview I've ever heard with this guy in 50 years. That's the best one he's ever done. And, I put it up on my YouTube channel, and all of a sudden, like, within a month, it had like 10,000 views, and it was like, oh, okay. And on the YouTube thing, it's not a very exciting medium because I just put the interview, I just put the audio up. There's no, like, special video footage, or I don't do a photo montage. First of all, the photo montage is labor intensive, and I did it once, and I got a copyright notice saying. Now, what was even more ironic was that the picture I had used is a picture I had taken, but YouTube didn't want to hear from that because they said, well, prove that it's your copyright. It's like, how can I prove that I took this picture? I'm telling you, I took this picture, and I just said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, the point being that it got 10,000 views, and it's just the audio. And that one I go, you know what, I did nail that. I didn't know too much about the guy, But I did my research, and I got him talking. That childhood psychology that we spoke about at the beginning, I used it. I got him talking like he was on the couch, you know. And so that one was a good moment. And if you're a Status Quo fan, I certainly suggest listening to it, because I think you'll hear stuff that you haven't heard other places. At least that's what the people in the news groups were saying, right? And those are the diehards normally in the news groups, right? So if they're saying it's something new and interesting, I'm assuming it must have been.
Now, you just said about the psychology again. Like, do you catch yourself often, like, during interviews, like, saying to yourself, like, this is a psychology moment?
Sure, of course. You know, whenever you're dealing with anything that starts getting away from just the new album or the new tour, and you start getting into, you know, talk to me about the band member that left, and when he left, was it a sad moment for you, and how did you get over it? And, you know, I just interviewed Nick Menza formerly of Megadeth, I should say. Mm-hmm. And I said, so, you know, he mentioned his knee surgery, and that's one of those where you pick up on stuff, you know. I didn't have a question about the knee surgery, and because that's one of those things that everybody knows, but he mentioned the knee surgery that he had, and I said, yeah, and then the band just sort of fired you. Was it just sort of like we heard in the press that they just sort of fired you? Or was there more to that? And then he went into the story. You know, Dave called and said this and said that, and then the psychology moment came in where I said, well, how did you feel at that time? Was it the lowest point in your life? Was it a dark moment? And he said, yeah, you know, it was pretty dark. And then so we got into that kind of quote-unquote touchy-feely moment, right, of
right.
Tell me about your feelings. And so, yeah, it plays into it. It plays into it quite a bit, actually. You know, understanding when somebody is understanding when somebody is putting themselves on the line or bearing their soul to you, and then, you know, going with it and working with it and getting more questions. Because one of the comments I get a lot from people is that, oh, I've never heard him say that. Oh, I've never heard her say that. That was interesting. They've never talked about that. And I think it comes out. And I said, listen, I think the psychology has something to do with it.
That's wild.
You know? Yeah. You know.
Who would have thought, like, all these years later, like, you'd be using that to interview musicians? Well,
obviously I did. That's why. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think I don't know if it's that specifically, or if that in itself, that training has become such a part of me that it is who I am now, and so those questions and that how to ask a question sort of comes up that way, you know. Yeah, but hey, it seems to work. People seem to enjoy it.
Right.
They enjoy those moments where an artist is being so totally honest that they answer something that you never expect them to have answered.
Right.
So, you know.
Now, is there? Do you have like a wish list of people that you've never gotten a chance to interview?
Oh, absolutely. I've met John Bon Jovi. I have never interviewed John Bon Jovi. I would, especially now with the way the band is going, the way his marketing is going, the way that he seemingly is only touring in non-North American markets. I think it would be absolutely fascinating. A real one-to-one with Ozzy Osbourne would be absolutely fascinating. You know, Sabbath played in Montreal a few years ago, about 2 years ago, I guess, was the last tour, right? When
yeah.
13, I guess it was 2013. Mm-hmm. And they held a general press conference, and every reporter was allowed to ask a question. Not every reporter did ask a question, but I did. And, you know, I said to him, now that you're in Sabbath, what does that mean about your solo career? Will you blah, blah, blah? And he answered me. And so, in theory, I've interviewed him. But in theory, I've also not interviewed him. Asking a question in an interview are not necessarily the same thing. So I'd like to get a real, 20 minutes with Ozzy. Paul Stanley has never interviewed with me, and get a sense that he just doesn't want to. So, but I certainly would like to. I think that would be fun. Robin Zander of Cheap Trick would be a hoot. I've interviewed Rick Nelson. You know, I sat at the O'Hare American Airlines lounge one time with Tom Peterson, totally accidentally, and had a nice conversation. So I'm good there, you know.
Right.
But Robin would be nice, and I'm trying to think. I know who my number one is, but I'm trying to think if there's anybody else in between that I'm missing. Well, probably, but the number one person that I would want to sit down with would obviously have to be Axl Rose. He talks to no one ever. He says nothing. Sorry, I had to cough. He says nothing to no one, and I think it would just be a fun moment. It would be one of those where you're sort of sweating because you know that if you say something that he takes wrong, you might not say anything stupid, but he just might take it wrong, that the whole thing gets shot to hell, and whatever it took to make it happen, the 6 months of work and all the promises you've made just go flying out the window. Or it might be that you ask him every right question, and instead of talking to you for 20 minutes, he talks to you for an hour and 20 minutes, and then it becomes the interview. Like, oh, no, you haven't heard the Axl talk until you heard the Mitch interview with that. Like, that would be exciting because it's just one of those where it's either going to be a total F-up or it's just going to be pure gold. And that's sort of, you know, that gets the adrenaline flowing. It's like, all right, let's go. It's time for a show. You know, either I'm going to hit the wrong note or it's going to be the best frickin' rock and roll show you've ever done tonight. And Axl would definitely be the guy. I think that would. And I've interviewed pretty much everybody in Guns N' Roses. I mean, I've interviewed Duff. I've interviewed Steve. I've interviewed Matt. I've interviewed Gilby. I've interviewed Slash twice. Frank Ferrer, Richard Fortas, Bumblefoot, Dizzy Reed, DJ Ashbaugh. There's really not a lot of people that I mean, Izzy and Axl. Now, an Izzy interview would be great.
Yeah.
But an Axl interview would be it. I mean, if my Rob Halford ended up on 15 sites, just imagine what my Axl Rose would do.
Exactly.
Well, right? You know, Axl Rose hangs up on Mitch, probably wouldn't get a lot of headlines. Though Vince Gill hanging up on some guy recently who asked about Metallica seems to be getting on all the headlines. But I think Axl would be the one. But yeah, you know, again, and of course, I've interviewed Kirk Hammett in Metallica, and after that interview, which was in person, I had a chance to sit down and talk to Rob, but just sort of a friendly chat while, you know, he was waiting for his next interview to show up. So, but I think getting either James or Lars on the phone would be a hoot. I really think that, and I would prefer James to Lars, not because I prefer James to Lars, but because Lars does a lot of interviews and he says a lot of stuff. And you know, if there's not a Mitch interview, there'll be another somebody Lars interview. But James is more, he does them, but not as much as Lars, and I think that would be a funner interview. And of course, with the psychology skills, maybe I could get some of those childhood questions in there. But yeah, but Axl Rose is, I mean, come on, isn't that everybody's?
I'm on Axl's shit list.
Yeah, but Axl would be a fun interview. Yeah, you know.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah, I the first time I interviewed Bumblefoot, I asked him what his feelings were about when Axl like decides to go on late and they're just sitting around waiting for Axl, and he told his feelings. Well, it hit everywhere, and as I talked to Ron after that, he got in a lot of trouble from Axl for that interview. So, and every time he's come back on since, it's always like, can we please not talk about Guns N' Roses? Just, we can talk about anything but Guns N' Roses, please.
That's funny. Yeah, I've heard that too from different people where they'll say, "Oh, I mentioned this. You probably shouldn't have done that," but you know, it's all right. You do what you can. Exactly. But yeah, Axl. I'm trying to think who else is out there that would be a hoot. I mean, sort of done everybody. I guess Bruce Dickinson. Have I ever talked? I don't remember if I've ever talked to Bruce. I know I've talked to all the other Maiden guys, but Bruce, I guess, would be a hoot. But boy, I've done Judas Priest. I've done Whitesnake. I've done Kiss. This might sound wrong, but I've sort of done everybody I wanted to. Which is kind of a good thing, actually, right? But there you go.
That's funny. Now, how about like with the whole internet? How much has that changed?
Everything.
Your whole job.
Interviews? Oh, everything.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, Metal Edge magazine started printing rock star email addresses when email was sort of the new cool thing that was coming out,
Right.
And by the way, some of those email addresses are still valid if you have an old Metal Edge lying around.
That's funny.
It is. And I started, a university professor in 94, I guess it was, said, we want to get into this internet thing. We want you to sign up for an account, and we want you to email somebody, that not a friend but out of the country, and wait for their reply, and then share your reply in school. And I went, oh, well, all right. So I emailed out of the Metal Edge magazine, Tom Hamilton, Zakk Wylde, Tommy Lee, Charlie Benente, and a bunch of others, and I asked them a question. Like I said to Tom Hamilton, hey, you should play Lord of the Thighs more, and blah, blah, blah. And those guys all wrote back. Tommy Lee put me on the guest list for the Generation Swine Club Tour in Toronto because of this email contact, which was like 3 years later. Zakk Wylde, the same thing. Charlie Benente, I still talk to him. He was in Montreal just recently. Tom Hamilton. And it changed everything because of those contacts led to other contacts, and those other contacts led to even more other contacts.
Right.
And a lot of those emails, like I said, are still valid. And so every so often I can go back and say, oh, yeah, and just use the old contact and get in touch with somebody. And so, yeah, it's changed everything because I never would have spoken to Tommy Lee otherwise. I never would have been invited to the Generation Swine show in Toronto. I never would have interviewed Zakk Wylde and have him come play in Club Soda on my birthday and have been a guest on. And that just never would have happened. And one opportunity leads to another opportunity, which leads to another opportunity, right? And so it goes. And so, it changed everything. And, of course, now it changes it more and more and more because when you're going to interview somebody, doing the research in itself is just a lot simpler. You don't have to go to the library or find a tiger beat and cut out the back article, which was a whole bunch of hocus pocus anyway. It changes everything. Absolutely everything. So thank God for the internet. And it makes me do the show. I mean, now with Skype and Skype Recorder, I can tape all my interviews through a computer. In fact, I'm talking to you right now through the computer.
This is true. Check that
out. I called you through Skype and talking to you through Skype. So, it changed everything, and thank God for that.
Now, do you have problems with Skype? I always have problems with Skype, and I stopped using it.
I do on occasion have problems with Skype. In fact, I mentioned the Nick Menza interview, which is the latest episode. If you listen to it, that call in that afternoon was just an absolute cluster F. It was just a complete and utter mess. We were going to talk for 20 minutes, and Skype kept dying on us, and we ended up being on the phone for over 3 hours.
Oh.
And, I interviewed him and Chris Poland at the same time, and one of the calls, Chris Poland's call, kept dropping off. And, I was going to edit it all down and just do it, and I finally just said, you know what, I'm just going to put bridges between the calls. So I would say, So, hey, you're working with James Lomenzo, phone dies. So if you go listen to the episode, you'll hear the phone die as the question's coming out, and I'll say, well, there you have it, folks. Skype died on us again, but let's get right into part 3, and here's Nick answering the question. And, it's not always reliable, and I find a lot of times in my headphones I hear a lot of static, and sometimes when I listen back to the tape, the static's not there, but sometimes it is, and it's not me. It's the Skype connection, and, what are you going to do?
Right. Yeah, I would have such nightmares with it. I stopped using it a while ago.
But, as much as possible, I try to do interviews when there's absolutely nobody else in the house, because I do them all out of the house. So I try to make sure there's nobody here because that means nobody else is on iPads, iPhones, and I try to make sure that my stream is as pristine as possible. It's just that, the bandwidth is not being sucked out by my daughter watching Netflix or something. And
Gotcha.
that seems to help. That does seem to help. I do notice that when I'm doing an interview, let's say we had done this at 7 o'clock tonight rather than 9:15, I'm pretty sure that with everybody on the internet, our connection would have been a lot spottier. So, who knows? Maybe I'm just lucky with Skype, but it seems to work.
Now here's the very important question: how the hell do you make money doing this?
Oh boy, that's a good question. You hustle. There's a lot of hustling. When I'll just talk about Heavy Montreal, for example. When Heavy Montreal came, a ad agency had contacted me about providing a visibility for the festival. And so if you look at my Facebook, Twitter, and the one-on-one feed on iTunes and all that, there was a lot of, I did an interview, put it up, took a picture of standing on the stage, tweeted it. And they had a white wall going on where everything that was tweeted and Facebook was going to be automatically repurposed onto the various websites that they had media partnerships with. So there's a lot of pictures of, Mitch and Don Dawkins floating around the internet because of that. And that was an actually really good payday. It was almost $1,000 for 3 days' work, which is not bad.
Right.
And I had access to catering, and I had access to free parking, and I had free access to the show. So if you include paid meals, because whether I'm at a festival or sitting at home, I got to eat, and if I'm at home, I got to pay for food, and if I'm at a festival, I got to pay for food. So just the fact that expense was taken out of my life, and I got, you're looking maybe like at a $1,200 weekend, which is not bad. So
right.
The podcasting thing itself is not very much of a moneymaker. It's all the garnish that goes around it. Having a successful website with ads running on it, like Talking Metal Mark's thing has an ad, has that. Doing this backstage stuff and providing coverage for the festival and providing a visibility. There's money in that. The podcasting thing, unless you're Eddie Trunk or Adam Carolla, it's sort of a very pleasant hobby, but it's all that other stuff. I did some writing recently for some band's bio, and I don't get credited for it. So there's a lot of the stuff that you get paid for it that is not the hooray, yay, there's Mitch. But without the hooray, there's Mitch on the one-on-one, those back opportunities aren't happening. So they sort of go together. If Mitch isn't the rock guy doing the interviews, then Mitch isn't the guy writing the bio that nobody hears about.
Gotcha.
So, they go, we need Mitch because he knows this band. He's good at this. And if I don't do those interviews, there's no, hey, we need Mitch. It's, hey, we need John from the John One-on-One podcast. And so it's really about hustling. It's one hell of a hustle, always being there and making your name out there. And when a band phones and says, hey, you just did an interview and we need a new press release, would you mind? You go, all right, I'll do it.
Sure.
Give me whatever. So that's that. I mean, I don't know how you make money doing the live show. I mean, I'm assuming you must have a sponsor or something, or is this more of like the rest of the podcast is sort of a glorified kind of hobby?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. See,
yeah.
That's okay.
I work I go to work. I work in the car business, and it's funny because I work. I do photography for some car dealerships for the internet, and then I'm an internet manager at this little small used car lot. And it's real small, it's real slow, and the best part about it is I just have an office, and I sit in there and do all my research and work or whatever I got to do, and sometimes I'll tape my interviews while I'm there. And I was interviewing Carmine Apiece, and in the middle of the interview, a customer came in, so I had to hold on for a second, Carmine, and I had to I'm trying to sell this car to this guy, and then I get on, he's like, where the fuck are you at? What are you doing? I'm like, I'm trying to work and make a living here. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I did that for many, many years. You know, working at Brave Words was not a money-making operation. It really was like compiling a fanzine on a more professional level. Now, you know, the people that run it were making money on the advertising and record companies, but the minions, which I was,
right.
We were really just contributing to this wonderful heavy metal fanzine.
Right.
And then that's not to put down Brave Words at all. They're absolutely wonderful. They do a great job.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you had to work a full-time job at the time. And it's all right. I did. I'm good with it. I'm happy with it. I'm happy with what I'm doing now, but I was happy with that, too. That was good.
Now, your podcast itself, you have it on all different outlets. Do you think that's more helpful, or does it take away from, listens on certain outlets?
Yeah, of course. But I look at the aggregate, not at the individual. The aggregate on all platforms combined, you know, is roughly in the 50,000 listens a week. 2 shows, 25,000 each. If you do the aggregate. You know, iTunes alone is about 10,000. The thing is, how can I put this? If you have, for example, like a Microsoft tablet, they are more prone to have TuneIn built in, and so they won't necessarily go to iTunes. They won't necessarily go to Spreaker, but there'll be a TuneIn icon. So I got to be on TuneIn if I want to go get those guys.
Gotcha.
iTunes really speaks to the iPhone, iPad, whatever person, and so you got to be on iTunes. They won't go, you know, the guy with the iPhone won't necessarily download the Stitcher app or the TuneIn app because they got iTunes. They got iTunes podcast. Why do they need to? So you got to be on that one. Stitcher,
gotcha.
In particular, and I'll get I'll make the answer shorter in a minute. But Stitcher really goes with people that have a Google phone, like a Google Play and that kind of store. They push Stitcher more. So you sort of got to be on all of them. Otherwise, you're excluding a segment of the smartphone clientele or the iPad or the whatever you call them. What's an iPad if it's not an iPad? Just a tablet, I guess?
Yeah.
You're excluding them. And then there's iHeartRadio. Now, iHeartRadio, from what I could figure out and how it's set up with us, is that they don't have a direct link to them. They take the Spreaker feed. You know, iTunes and iHeart both require the Spreaker feed. They require an RSS or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you got to be on Spreaker, be on iTunes, and you got to be on Spreaker to be on iHeart. Now, here's the funny thing about iHeart. iHeart is a great brand. You know, you'll turn on the TV once in a while, and there'll be the iHeart Festival Christmas concert or whatever.
Right.
And so a lot of times and I had, in fact, I had a request today. A publicist said, do you want to interview so-and-so, big name, at least in my world, 80s act? And I said, yeah, of course I want to interview so-and-so from the big name 80s act. And they said, well, can you guarantee that it'll be on your iHeart feed? And I went, well, yeah, of course, because it goes on all my feeds. But they specifically want that iHeart connection. And because iHeart repurposes it on through their sort of iHeart platform, and there's a sort of a prestige to it. So, yeah, you sort of got to do all of them, because if you're not on all of them, you're missing out. So, yeah, I got 10,000 on iTunes, but if I say to you I got 10,000, you go, well, that's sort of okay. But if you go, well, the aggregate, when you take TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, blah, 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 I've got 25 per episode, suddenly you go, oh, that's actually not bad. That's like playing, like, that's like speaking to Madison Square Garden every Tuesday. You know, it's like, that's not so bad. You know? In fact, it's more than, it's almost like...
No, it's pretty damn freaking good.
Right, and I know people in local radio that are making a bunch of money with their show at drive time that are getting 4,000 listeners.
Right.
And you go, you know what? I'm doing 6 times better than you, and I'm my own boss. So,
exactly.
So no, it's important to get on that, and I think it's also important in terms of visibility, because if you're on all those different, in my world at least, if you're on those different platforms, people go, oh, I'm on TuneIn, I see this Mitch LaFon guy. Oh, I'm on Spreaker, I saw this Mitch LaFon guy. Like, well, who's this Mitch LaFon guy? Like, I think it attracts an interest. I mean, yeah, of course, if I was on only iTunes, instead of maybe 10,000, maybe I would have 12,000. Perhaps I might pick up 2,000 stragglers or something. But I think the different ones really serve their purpose. They really, really are useful.
Gotcha. Well, this has been awesome. This has been like a learning experience and good conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It actually has been, and they've been good questions. Now, of course, you started off with the first question that says, I don't know a lot about you, and you still don't. See, so I've managed to not give you a whole... You haven't learned a whole lot about me other than the psychology, but, it's a fun gig. I mean, when I showed up to the Scorpions in Montreal the other day, and they had an all-access pass waiting for me, that's just fun for the 12-year-old kid inside of me that used to listen to Rock You Like a Hurricane on Friday night videos on NBC at 1:30 in the morning or whatever the hell it was, 12:30.
Right.
It's a long way from pretending that I've gone to sleep so that Mom wouldn't yell at me to get up at 12:30 to watch, hours and hours of Hungry Like the Wolf on Friday night videos, and then go, they played Rock You Like a Hurricane. Oh, my God, it's so exciting. Oh. And here I am standing next to them, invited. I can't complain. I really can't complain.
Now, have you ever, gone outside of the music or hard rock genre and interviewed other types of people?
Oh, sure. Like I said, I interviewed that guy, Kevin Moore, who's a film producer. I interviewed Coldplay back in the day.
Okay.
Before they became this huge band, EMI phoned and said, we've got this new band called Coldplay, would you mind? And so I did them. I did Mandy Moore, the guitarist in Five Finger Death Punch, Jason Hook.
Jason.
Used to play with her. And so that's one of those connections. I had done the Kiss tribute. The Kiss tribute had Brent Fitz play on the track. Brent Fitz is friends with Jason Hook. And he said, hey, my buddy is from Toronto, and he's starting this thing. There's a showcase. Would you go mind? Anyway, I ended up interviewing Mandy Moore, Hillary Duff. I'm trying to think. Anyway, there has been.
Right.
There has been, and I really don't have any discount. I mean, if you say to me, you got to sit down with Snoop Dogg tomorrow, it's like, okay, I'll sit down with Snoop Dogg tomorrow. I'll go do my research, and by the time I sit with Snoop Dogg, you will not know that I am not a fan. You will think, wow, Mitch is a diehard Snoop Dogg fan. Who knew? and that's the way it's got to be. I mean, whether it's Snoop Dogg, Madonna, or by the time I sit down with you, you're going to be guaranteed that you'll think that I was your biggest fan ever, because I'll have done the research to be able to have a conversation and go, oh, yeah, I remember that. You know, sometimes I don't have a clue, but I did the research and it's in there. So,
how about being Canadian? Any hockey guys?
You know, I had a sit down with Chris Nyland about 2 years ago, the former enforcer of the Habs, which was kind of nice. And I grew up actually living next to Ken Dryden, the goalie of the Habs back in the Stanley Cup game. So I never interviewed Ken Dryden, but I spoke to him at the local community pool often. And, you know, at Halloween, when you would go trick-or-treat and ring at his doorbell, he would answer the door. I mean, that was one of those things. Back in the day, they didn't have butlers and publicists, and Ken would answer the door, and he would not give you candy. He would give you Montreal Canadian hockey pucks at Halloween. And it was great because you had to have a strategy. You had to go to Ken's house first so that the pucks would hit the bottom of the bag and not last, where it would go to the top and smash all your lollipops and bags of chips. So you had to go, all right, Ken's house first, then we'll hit the rest of the neighborhood. There was a strategy in trick-or-treating with Ken Dryden.
That's freaking awesome.
Yeah, you know, Ken was great. And I did back in the early 90s, I was a double-A certified coach which for baseball, which is sort of a higher level coach in the province. And cool. I got to work a summer camp with the Montreal Expos as assistant coaches. So I was working alongside Andy McGaffigan, Tim Wallach, UB Brooks. God, who else was there? I think John Milner, the first baseman, was there. Anyway, you know, and the catcher Mike Fitzgerald, who had been acquired by the Expos in the Gary Carter trade. And, you know, and here I was, whatever I was, 18 or 19 at the time, doing this stuff, and Mike Fitzgerald would go, do you want to go see the Expos game? They give us tickets, and I got nobody to give them to. So he would give me tickets behind the dugout all the time. Not the dugout, the home plate. Sorry, he'd give me tickets behind home plate all the time. And, you know, at 19, 20, you're getting the Montreal Expos catcher giving you free tickets to a, you know, you felt like the king, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, dude, I'm kidding. Because you know very well that the guys that sit behind home plate at a Major League Baseball game is, you know, the MasterCard Corporation guy or the Budweiser. Well, it's not some 19-year-old slob from backwoods Quebec. It's, you know, so that was kind of cool. So yeah, so no, there's been a lot of sports, you know, and where I lived back then, I had there was Ken Dryden, who was our neighbor, who was the Montreal Canadiens goalie. Bill Stoneman, the pitcher of the Expos, was another neighbor like a street over. And then in the Canadian Football League, the quarterback at the time was a guy named Joe Barnes for the Montreal Alouettes. He lived down the street, so they were all within walking distance. And it was fun because there was a community pool. People didn't really have their own pools back then. There was a community pool. And so you would have Ken Dryden sitting on a chair next to Bill Stoneman, sitting on a chair next to Joe Barnes, all talking sports while, you know, you're 7 years old swimming going, the three major sports stars of the Montreal scene are all sitting here next to me. This is kind of interesting. Yeah, so there's been sports, not a lot of sports interviews, but again, I would do a sport interview. If somebody said to me, Mitch, we've got a WWE show to offer you or a Major League Baseball show to offer you, believe me, I would get in there, do all the research, and you would think that I had been a diehard WWE fan for the last 50 years. And, you know, that's part of the gig, right? The work is part of the gig. You can't just sort of, can't make it up. You know, a lot of kids, when they do like an oral in English class, you would write it on the bus the morning of as you were being driven to school. You can't do that here. You can't write your questions on the bus on the way to the interview. You gotta do a week's worth. You know, I've got Frankie Bonelli on next week, and I've already started looking. You know, I got to make sure. Now, I happen to know Frankie. When my daughter was born, he sent a gift and the whole thing.
Nice.
I've known
Frankie's a good guy.
Yeah, Frankie's a very good guy. He sent a pink sweater that we still have, actually. But so I don't have to do too much research. But I know him. But I'm not going to be that cocky guy who I go, yeah, I know Frank. Yeah, I can wing this.
Right.
So I'm going to do the research to make sure that I know him. And I can't emphasize that enough. Anybody out there who thinks that they can do this and wing it is just a fool. It's a fool. You got to do the work, right?
Absolutely.
So there you go. But yeah, you know, there you go. That's my story. I certainly hope we haven't bored people to death, but that's the story.
Well, you haven't bored me, so I'm in.
I'm good. I'm good. I'll give you
Cool.
another 10 minutes. If you want. I can go on. I could go on forever. That's my problem. I can talk forever. But any other questions? Because I'm good. I figured let's go to 11. We've already gone to 10:50.
Yeah, right. All right.
Might as well round it out. But whenever you're ready to go, just let me know.
How about you mentioned earlier about
yeah.
What's that?
Music I'm listening to these days. People like that question.
Okay.
But no, go.
How about all right, well, real quick, the one question I was getting ready to ask. You mentioned earlier about the one person you wanted to do a do-over with was Blackie Lawless. Is there anybody else that you'd want to do a do-over with?
Yeah, well, you know, Blackie, I'm supposed to do Blackie at some point. I put a request in, and they said, yeah, we'll find some time. Well, I'm trying to think. You know, I probably, it wouldn't be in a negative sense where I've done a bad job and I would want to do over. I would probably just want to, all those guys I mentioned before, Alice Cooper, David, I just want to do over because they're fun. And I would
right.
be happy to talk to them 6 days a week, every week, and do a new interview. I would do the history of David Coverdale from crib to wherever he is now. You know, so I would do do-overs not in the negative sense. I would do do-overs. Listen, I would love to do a do-over with Ronnie James Dio, but unfortunately not possible. But boy, if we could bring him back and get one more shot, wouldn't that just be fantastic? But
absolutely.
You know, wild dreams aside, I would love to talk to Rob Halford again. I've talked to him, I think, 6 times so far. We're 7, 8, 9, and 10. Let's go. Let's set her up. Alice Cooper, I've done. I'm trying to think. Alice Cooper, probably 4 or 5 times. You know, I'm ready for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know, Gene Simmons, I did when I was 11 years old, 30-some years ago. I think it's time for a do-over because a lot has happened since June 9th, 1980 and 2015 October, right? So.
I think quite a few things have happened.
Yeah, those are the do-overs I would do. And Blackie Lawless, because I think there was 2 problems with that interview. A, I don't think Blackie's a big talker. I think he comes off a bit arrogant and like a little too cocksure. And B, I think that I was the victim of my own not being prepared. I sort of think I could have gotten away with winging it because this was the early days. I mean, this wasn't last week. This was like 15 years ago. And I don't think I was as ready as I should have been. I think if I had been more ready and had smarter questions, he might have talked a lot longer. You know, so I think it was sort of 50-50. I think he had an attitude of I don't like interviews, but I also think perhaps I should have been better prepared with better questions and also better to deal with short answers rather than get freaked out. I think I got freaked out. I just went, oh, yes, great. He said yes. Okay, what do I do with that? Now when I get those, I just go, all right, I'll pull out another question. Eventually you'll answer something. And I've actually said on interviews where they're not answering recently, in the last 6 months, I'll go, if I'm bothering you or you know, you don't have to answer these. Like, if you don't want to talk, and then all of a sudden that sort of snaps them out of it, and they go, oh, maybe I should answer more. who did I say that to recently? Somebody was giving me yes/no answers, and I said, I really can't do much with yes/no answers, and then they started giving me longer answers, and I was like, oh, thank God. But go listen to all the episodes. You'll find it, because I don't edit them. So somewhere in there's been a couple where I've said, got to work with me here. It's not working.
That's funny. Now, how about new Wasp single, Last Runaway, or Chris Holmes' Let It Roar? Which do you like better?
Oh, that's a tough question. They're both they both have good qualities. I think I'm going to go with the Wasp one. I wasn't really a Wasp fan in the 80s. In fact, not at all, though I would see the videos, and I liked the videos, but never enough to be compelled to buy an album. This one I saw, and I had been sent a preview link of the entire album, and I had sort of ignored the link. I was like, Wasp, I'm not going to listen to this. And then I saw the video, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go check out the album. And it turns out the album is actually quite good, which really surprised me.
Yeah, I really like the song. I really like the Last Runaway.
And I don't mean to insult any Wasp fans. It just wasn't one of the bands I liked. Doesn't mean that they're bad or anything. It wasn't for me. But yeah, that one song really turned me on to the album, and I think the album's actually really, really good. In fact, of bands from the 80s that are still recording, a lot of them do very forgettable music. This one is actually probably one of his best, quite frankly. So good for Blackie.
How about
Golgotha, right? Something like that?
Yeah, Golgotha.
Something like that. Yeah, it's a good album. And the single compelled me to listen.
They were my second concert. I was 14 years old.
Wow.
It was Wasp, Metallica, and Armored Saint.
Oh my, 83?
84. It was the Ride the Lightning tour, the first Wasp album, and the first Armored Saint album.
Wow. Well, my first was Kiss, and my second was Kiss at the Palladium. So there you go.
Nice.
The Eric Carr first show, that was worthy, very worthy. And then 2 weeks later, my third show was Cheap Trick at the Montreal Forum. So it was Kiss, Cheap Trick. What a way to get started in the career. Now I'm easily over 1,000 or 2,000 or maybe even more. I mean, I stopped counting about 15 years ago, and I was somewhere at 800, and I've seen probably twice as many shows since then. So I'm probably at 2,000, 3,000 shows, which is fine with me. Keep them coming. Never enough.
I hear you. My first one was Judas Priest and Great White, Defenders of the Faith tour. And then it was the Wasp, Metallica. And my third one was Kiss and Queensryche. Animalized tour. Yeah.
Speaking of Queensryche, I just saw them with the Scorpions on their short run, and that really, to me, was the best pairing and the best show of 2015. Queensryche, it was very nondescript. There's not a whole lot of stuff going on stage except an incredible band kicking ass for whatever it was, 45 minutes. They just came out there and they just tore it up. And then Scorpions come on, and it's just a whole package. They've got a whole video screen presentation behind them representing the whole 50 years of the band, and they put the flag of the country they're in, and there's just a whole, visually, it's just this might probably not a very manly word, but it's just very gorgeous. It's just beautiful, beautiful to look at. And then they did a couple of medleys. They did a ballad medley. So instead of having Send Me an Angel and what were the other ones in there? Always Then. Anyway, instead of having a medley, instead of having 5 ballads in the show that just kills the show, they put them in a medley. And then for the die hard fans, they did a 70s medley of songs from the first 3 albums that had Catch a Train, Top of the Bill, Steam Rock, what was it, Steam Rock Fever, whatever it's called.
Wow.
And so it gave that diehard fan like a 7-minute spot of those songs stuck together, because it doesn't make sense for them to pull those songs apart and say, okay, we're going to, because you've got half the fans that grew up on, Rock You Like a Hurricane, I would go, well, what the hell's Top of the Bill? I've never heard of this. So they just did it in a way to please the guys that were there from the first album and the fans that were there in the 80s, and then they put in some of the songs, and then it was just, I would love to see more bands do that. And I know I'm very critical of Kiss and their set list, but I don't need you to play Charisma all 4 minutes, but give me a spot where you do like 30 seconds of Charisma into whatever, Rise to it, into I Just Wanna from Revenge, into Under the Gun from Animalize, and give me that 4-minute spot or that 5-minute spot where you cram them all together. And it's not the same as having the full song, but at least I'm somewhat satisfied, rather than, oh, look, there's Tommy Sayer doing an 8-minute guitar solo. That's just wonderful,
right.
Great. Like, oh, that's great, And the Scorpions, the guys did solos, but they have these songs called Coast to Coast and other stuff which is like instrumental stuff. So they did these sort of solo parts where guys could go off stage and get a break, but because it's an instrumental, it's more of a song, and that also was smart, because the whole stop and wang, 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 it's like, oh my God. So the whole package was just great. I really, really enjoyed that. And I would say to you, hey, run out and buy a ticket, but I think they only did like 12 shows or something, and it's done. So that's a bit of a shame. But if Scorpions and Queensryche, or Scorpions and whoever, do a full sort of winter tour or a spring tour in the U.S. or Canada, you got to go out and see them. They're just. It was just really, really good for a lot of reasons.
Now, you know what's amazing? Like, first off, I've never seen the Scorpions, but second off, like I'm here in Philly, so Philly, which is one of the major markets in the States, a lot of these bands don't even come through Philly anymore.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I think what they've done, a lot of them, is they've considered Camden to be Philly, and they're going to Camden, and then a lot of them just figure, you know what, you live in Philly, drive to Madison Square Garden, stop being such a big whiny, get in your car and do the drive. Don't. And I think promoters have gotten very sensitive to that too. It's like, yeah, we can't really book the tri-state area anymore because we can't fill out the Spectrum or whatever that you have now with Madison Square with. What is the Philly one? The Spectrum closed years ago.
Spectrum, they actually knocked down a few years back.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's the Wells Fargo Center.
Right. Okay, that's where the Flyers play. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think they just figure that it's just become too tough in the tri-state area, and then you look at some bands like Judas Priest on the last tour. I think they had booked some of the larger venues, and they ended up at shows where they had 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 fans, and a promoter looks at that and goes, "They're only doing 3,000 in New York City. Nah, I ain't bringing them to Philly. It's just not going to happen." And other bands like a Metallica, they go, "Listen, I can do Madison Square Garden for 7 nights in a row. Why do I need to pack up and truck down the highway to Philly? Just come and see me here." I think that's going on, but it's the same in Quebec. Montreal is getting all the shows now, and Quebec City is not getting any. And on top of that, Toronto is getting twice as many shows as Montreal. I'm trying to think. Styx, Tesla, is it Foreigner? Who's on that bill? They came to Toronto, but no Montreal date. Van Halen came to Toronto, but no Montreal date. And I know a lot of it has to do with the promoters. The promoters, for whatever reason, don't want to bring bands in.
Right.
But that happens too. It happens too. They, people were like, "You want to see Van Halen? You got to drive." And it's like, I'm not sure. And I couldn't. I unfortunately couldn't because it was the same weekend as Heavy Montreal. where I was being paid to tweet.
That's freaking awesome. That's the dream job right there. 2015. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it was a great gig because they just wanted the marching orders was to make the festival seem very exciting, which, by the way, the festival is very exciting without me. So to make it look exciting is very easy to do. And a lot of people liked the fact that, it's the pictures of the backstage area, or here's Mitch with Don Doc, and people got a kick out of that. So it actually was very easy to do. It was like, all right, well, just go take a picture standing next to this guy. People love it because a picture with whatever rock star would get retweeted almost twice as much as a picture of here's the stage or here's the catering. So I was like, well, people seem to like me and a rock star, so let's find me some rock stars. And it's a weird kind of thing, to have that going on, because you spent your life at a 10-year-old standing at the back of the venue, back of the spectrum, going, I hope Kiss walks out tonight. And now it's like, listen, we need Mitch standing next to this guy because he's got to tweet it. And it's like, okay, sure, weird, kind of. I like it. It's a weird thing. You said 2015.
All right, 2015. What is Mitch's so far as of October 1st? Your choice for album of the year?
Wow, boy, that's. I'm going to. There are two in the running. There is the Black Star Riders, The Killer Instinct, which came out in February, which is absolutely a wonderful, down and dirty rock and roll album. And then I am somewhat biased by the fact that they were so kind to me. I did 3 interviews. They set me up all. The Scorpions' Return to Forever, the 19-track version, they just released it in the States with 19 tracks. They have 4 versions, a 12-track version for Europe, a 16-track deluxe version, an 18 but they released a 19-track version in North America, which sells at Best Buy. I saw it the other day for $10.99, which is, they're giving it away, quite frankly. I just love that album, and I love it because the music on it is really good, because what they really did on this album is that they took demos from the Savage Amusement years and Love Drive and that they had never released, and they reworked them with the new band into songs. So you sort of get a time capsule of some 80s sounding Scorpions with some 90s sounding Scorpions with some now songs. So they also wrote 3 new songs on it. And you take that it's a good album, and then you take the fact that the guys have just been so nice to me, it just makes you like it more. Like when a guy's a dick with you, you go, fuck you and your album, excuse the language. But when they're nice to you, you just, I don't know, it just makes it all sound better, right?
I agree.
So Return to Forever, I think I'm sort of biased by, but Return to Forever, look, I'll tell you, Return to Forever, Scorpions, Killer Instinct by Black Star Riders, Electric Blood by a band called The Biters out of Atlanta, an unknown band, first album. It is absolutely fantastic. It's taking Cheap Trick and the Ramones. They
are loved.
They are fantastic. And then a band that's a little bit older, Backyard Babies, put out an album called 4x4. Swedish band. Most people don't know them in North America. But bloody hell, that album is great. It's only, I think, 34 minutes long. And it's another one of those sort of Cheap Trick meets whoever. It's just a fun rock and roll album. So 2 albums by sort of established bands, and then 2 albums by lesser known bands are really the top 4. And this week I received an album by a band, another Swedish band called Mustache. The album's called Testosterone. Nobody here is ever going to hear of it, but it's on Spotify and iTunes and all that. That is just another fun album. So there you go. Those are the top 5 as of October 1st. Scorpions, Biters, Backyard Babies, Black Star Riders, and Mustache. You got to go. First of all, the name is funky. The album is called Testosterone, which is like it's total cliche, but the songs are great. They're fun songs. They're like classic rock and roll, which you can't beat. You know. So you like the Biters, by the way?
You know, I have not heard the album, but I know like they played Philly a lot, and I know a lot of people here in the Philly scene are always ranting and raving about them.
Oh, the album's great. Electric Blood is great. If you have access to Spotify or Apple Music, I guess was what they call it, go stream those 3 albums. You will enjoy. You'll just have a great. And again, all 3 albums are all about 35 minutes long, so it's not a huge time investment. It's not like you have to sit down with 17 songs in 85 minutes. It's in and out. It's the length of a Seinfeld episode. But your ears are going to love it. You're just going to go, yeah, you know what? These are great albums. So there you go. Those are the top 5 as of today. And I really don't think there's anything coming down the pike that are going to beat those albums. In fact, I think we're pretty much done with new albums, right? I mean, other than the Queensryche, which I've heard, the new Queensryche Condition Human is exceptionally good too. So I'll give them props. But it's not officially released as of October 1st, so it doesn't count.
It's out tomorrow, I think, isn't it?
It's out tomorrow. Yep.
Yeah.
And October 21st in Japan, if you have any listeners in Japan.
Nice. My choice so far for number 1 is a band from Sweden, Thunder Mother, the album Road Fever. Have you heard that?
I don't know that. No, I don't. I'm literally taking out a pen, and I'm going to write that down. Thunder?
5 girls, Thunder Mother. They are like a love child of Motorhead meets AC/DC.
Oh, sweet. And what's the album called?
Road Fever.
All right. I'm looking that up. As soon as we're done here, I'm looking that up.
Phenomenal. I can't stop listening to it.
All right. So I'll trade you. Go listen to the 3 I mentioned, Mustache, Testosterone, Backyard Babies, 4x4, and the Biters, Electric Blood. And, of course, Black Star Riders, Killer Instinct. But I'll trade you. So go listen to those, and I'll listen to these. And we'll get back to each other on Facebook, and I guarantee you'll have great things to say. You'll be like, you know what, those ones rock. So there you go. Hey, we've reached a little bit past 11. We've done this for 2 hours now. It's not bad.
How about that?
That's not bad.
Pretty damn good.
Conversation.
Pretty damn good.
Good
Absolutely.
conversation. And I've actually run out of all my liquids on the side. I've got no more water, no more coffee. I'm going to start having dry throat in a minute.
Well, on that point, I will say, Mitch, thank you so much. This has been freaking phenomenal. I've had a blast.
Absolutely. And I hope I was enlightening and entertaining.
You were. Definitely were.
It's nice to not always have to have the pressure of having the questions and keeping things moving and just sort of being yourself, because it's a different conversation. So it's nice. It's nice to have that. So, so thank you for that.
You put the pressure on me.
Yeah, and you actually did quite well, because I noticed that I would stop suddenly, and then you'd have to take over, and it didn't throw you off at all. So there you go. That's
cool. Thank you.
Kudos
I appreciate that.
To that. Because that happens to me sometimes when you're interviewing a guy and they're going blah, 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 and you're 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then they stop and you go, oh, wait, all right, it's me now, great. It's funny because Rudolf Schenker just did that to me. If you listen to the episode I put up on Monday, I said, so, blah, 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 the new album, and he goes into a spiel, blah, 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 yada, yada, and he talks for 5 minutes, and I literally had turned off my mic, and I was drinking water and taking notes and checking email on my cell phone, and then he stopped, and I went, oh, and he goes, okay, you now, and I was like, whoa, now he's ordering me, too. Like, okay. Yes, sir, jawohl, Captain. I want to get right on that. Next question, okay. So that was funny, but Rudolph's funny. I love Rudolph. He's great. Great talent, great person, great sense of humor. There we go. I think I've officially run out of steam.
There you go. Look at that. I wore you out.
There you go. So thank you, sir. And
we'll
certainly have to do this again some other day. And if anybody calls in or has any comments, just let me know, good or bad. Hopefully I entertained those listening.
I hope so too. But hey, you entertained me, and it's been a learning experience. It's been an interesting experience, and I did learn stuff about you besides psychology. There you go. I have 2 kids. That's the other thing I mentioned. Right. And you grew up next door to Ken Dryden. Yeah, absolutely. That's you see, you're going to get me started again, but that was the greatest time because the 1970s, as you know, if you're a sports fan, I don't know if you're a hockey fan, but they won 5 Stanley Cups in a row, and that's when he lived next to me. And he didn't live next to me winning Stanley Cups when I was 47, and you go, hey, well, good for you. Good. When you're, how old was I in those days? 8, 9, 10 years old, and the number one goalie of the NHL lives next to you, who's just won 3 or 4 Stanley Cups in a row. It's not. It's like living next to Disneyland, right? I mean, it's a free ride every day. And the school that I would go to was actually behind his house. So I would leave my house, go across the street, cut across his lawn to get to my school. So I cut across his lawn every day, and he did it so much that, he would just say, hey, I don't think he knew my name, but he would just go, hey, how's it going? And, he wouldn't stop me. He wasn't a mean neighbor that said, don't go on my lawn. He would say, hey, how's it going? And just every day. And it was the number one goalie of the NHL who had 4 Stanley Cup rings, and that was unique, special. Listen, here we are 40 years later, and I can't stop talking about it. I mean, that's one of those. It's one of those. Yeah, those the Canadians, their first cup was beating the Flyers. They stopped us from getting our 3rd cup in a row. So never forget King Dryden. They dominated the latter part of the 70s. Between Kiss Alive 2 and Kiss Dynasty, it was all Montreal Canadiens. So it was just a great moment. I would put on Love Gun, Alive 2, watch the Habs win a Stanley Cup, discover Cheap Trick because they were just coming. I mean, it was just the best 4 years of my young life, right then and there. So there you go. All right, there we go. I've run out of. Thank you, sir. All right, Mitch. Thank you. Have a good one. Take care, and thank you. Yeah, we'll do this again. Absolutely. Cheers. See ya. All right, there he goes. The one and only Mitch LaFon. 2 hours. What a freaking blast that was.